Good day and welcome to this edition of Big Ideas in Supply Chain. My name is Ann Robinson and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Kinaxis. I'm joined by my co-host, Angel Mendez, Supply Chain Transformational Leader and Kinaxis Board Member. We have a really interesting conversation to do today around AI and its role in supply chain. We're joined by two heavyweights that you may recognize their names. Kevin O'Mara is the co-founder and chief research director for 0100. 0100 is a community of chief supply chain officers who are focused on driving a 0% carbon, 100% digital supply chains. We're also joined by Professor Pascal Van Hentenryck, who's a faculty member in the Industrial and Systems Engineering Department at Georgia Tech, and he's also director of AI for Opt, the Artificial Intelligence Institute for Advances in Optimization. Welcome to all of you. Now, I know, Angel, this is a topic that's been near and dear to your heart lately as we've started to explore it. You can't go anywhere without having a conversation about AI. It's permeating every aspect of our lives. Maybe I'll let you get the conversation going.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you guys for joining us. Kevin, I'm going to start with you. I know from conversations you and I've had that you've been recently hosting pretty senior supply chain leader events. There was a 0100 forum, of course, in Miami, but you also more recently held events at a couple of corporations that invited some of the top supply chain leaders in the world. When it comes to AI, what are you hearing from them? What are they seeing? What are they worried about? What are they looking forward to? And what's your own observation on this space?
Yeah, Angel, you're right. AI has been absolutely top of mind for supply chain leaders in the last several months, ever since ChatGPT burst on the scene and people started understanding generative. The question is, we're already doing this, right? And the answer is yes, but what's next? So they're being asked by their boards, as often as not, what's your plan for AI and how's it going to change the supply chain? And I think Google, for instance, which is a 0100 member, has helped us think differently about this. And I think the main takeaway is it's incredibly powerful in terms of doing what you're already doing with more of an edge toward learning. And the proliferation of data from the shop floor up through the system and then down out to the customer is so enormous that there's a lot of opportunity to build some of these superior learning models and basically crank up the pace of innovation. So there's a lot of expectation supply chain leaders have a good answer as to what we're doing with AI and how it's going to affect the operations.
And Pascal, coming to you for a second, your work at Georgia Tech is very broad. Obviously, we're in a Kinaxis context. We care about planning and we care about execution, but you also look at mobility and transportation and IoT and robotics and many other areas that are embedded in supply chains all over the world. What about you? What do you see in your work and what are people looking for, worried about, excited about?
So I think what we are trying to do is to do things that are not possible yet. And the key point is that AI would allow you to do some of these things. So doing things that are bigger or doing things faster, addressing some of the real-time constraints that we cannot meet right now, or solving some problems that are outside the scope of the technology right now. And so AI is going to help us do that. Why? Because essentially, I'm building on what Jason has said, is we can actually use learning. We can still use optimization, but we can use learning to actually learn how the systems, how people are solving problems. And then you can transfer it to something which is bigger, or you can make it much faster. That's what I see as the biggest opportunity. The fact that we can do things that could not be done before we had AI.
I know that AI for Opt is bigger than just Georgia Tech. There are many schools involved. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Institute and then some of the opportunities that you see from a supply chain perspective? I know you and I have been bantering about where these opportunities could emerge.
So let me give you a kind of a broad presentation of the Institute. So AI for Opt is funded by the National Foundation. It's one of the biggest grants that you can get for an SF. And it's all about combining AI and optimization, two technologies that are obviously fundamental to supply chains. So I would say that the two main trust and use cases that we have are supply chains and energy. And I think the reason we were successful in actually attracting the funding is because there are huge challenges that we are facing in both of these areas currently in society. So in supply chain, NSF came to us and said, we don't want you to optimize a little piece of the supply chain. We want to look at end-to-end supply chains. We want you to stop thinking about efficiency only, but look at resilience, look at sustainability, because most of the new business model are actually creating more waste, more greenhouse gas emission compared to what we were doing 5 years ago. So that's what they want us to focus on. In energy, they want zero emission, obviously, energy system. And these things, you would be surprised by the number of connections that they have, because it's all about mixing planning and executions and having models that are much more dynamic. Now, we are fortunate in the Institute to work with a lot of different partners. Obviously, Kinaxis is a partner, but we are actually driven by a lot of real case studies, data, because otherwise you cannot really innovate in that space. So you need the data, you need the computing power, but this is what can drive innovation, the real innovation in those areas.
Kevin, how consistent is that with what you're hearing sort of from that top layer, those chief supply chain officers?
It's very consistent in terms of wanting to have a big picture, end to end. I think the thing that feels topical for senior supply chain leaders is how to not try to tackle the entire thing in one go. I think if you're the NSF, you want to solve the big stuff. If you are a typical Fortune 100 company, Fortune 1000 company, you should be able to think about the big stuff, but you sure as heck better be able to figure out how to do something right now that you can use immediately and then build on later. I think the point that we're circling constantly around, AI is different because it has learning baked into its capability. Every other innovation on the tech side in the world of supply chain, since I've been thinking about it for 30 odd years, has been gated by the human factor, which is we have to go to sleep at the end of the day. And we can learn from our experiences previously, whether it's a nice high-end planning engine or some sort of a robotic and automation solve on the shop floor. But that gating factor is removed when you start using the data sets that are out there today, to Pascal's point. And so the acceleration is so appealing that I want to know, all right, then let me solve something right now that I can use immediately. And let me build something adjacent that I can also use immediately. And so forth. And then can I connect those things? Something on the logistics side, which allows me better route optimization, perhaps connected on the load building side, which allows me better fulfillment center operation, for instance. That's an opportunity where the power of learning within a heavy data model, using the kind of compute power that Pascal is talking about, might unlock something really huge. But they do want incrementalism to avoid signing up for some big bang that might one day happen, but depends on too many things falling into place. So it's a Pareto path to excellence, I think is what people are looking for.
So Kevin, 0100 has introduced the idea that there's a new paradigm, if you will, to define supply chains with. Moving from what many of our audience are familiar with, this idea of a SCORE model, a plan, source, make, deliver type of way of thinking and examining supply chains, to this notion that it's really more of an infinite loop, right? You have obviously the make and source and make cycles, but you now have to think through the regeneration and recycling cycles in order to drive sustainability. So now you've got a much broader definition. I'm all about the how. So I think a lot about, these tools are great, but where do they work? Where don't they work? Where are they catching on? Where are they showing utility? So from what you're seeing and hearing, both of you, I'll just open it up to both of you, where are the spots in that process that we like to define supply chains through, where we're seeing the earliest opportunities? Is it in the planning cycle? Is it in the invention cycle? Is it in regeneration? Where are you seeing?
I'll go first. I'm sure, Pascal, you have a lot of stuff you can add to this.
Go
let me just go because you talked
first.
about this loop model, which is the way we try to basically analyze and look at the application of technology to the 0-100 mission, decarbonization as well as growth and digitization. Plan, source, make, delivers on the left-hand side of a loop. The right-hand side is the demand curve. Selling is the first step. Then the customer using and regenerate, which is feeding it back into the original system. A ton of the valuable and effective AI is happening on the sell side. Frankly, everything, I was at Amazon for 3 years before starting 0-100. Everything that's happening with suggestions on the Amazon buy page is driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that's rich and ripe, as are chatbots providing service support. And then the other place where there's quite a bit already mature is on the old-fashioned supply chain side, Move, where logistics and optimization has been pretty effective at route optimization, some of the stuff I talked about earlier, using classical AI, not generative so far, but classical AI. So it's known and it's working. It's a question of how these bits tie across each other. And to your point, Pascal, about the end-to-end that you're being asked about, boy, it feels like once I start connecting these things and I have the data that represents this giant customer-side data set, blending with what ought to be a giant supply-side data set from IoT on the shop floor, in-vehicle tracking systems, ideally better sourcing. That's one of the worst areas as far as really getting good data sets. But those two should combine into a killer closed loop data model that's enormous, frankly. It has lots of potential. I don't know if that aligns with your experience.
No, I completely agree. And I want to, kind of go into a little bit more details of some of the things that I think are going to happen. So I agree that, the customer side is very well understood. Chatbots, almost everybody is using them to communicate with their customers. They're going to get better and better. But this is already there. I think where you're going to see a lot of improvements in planning, in operations. And so take a big e-commerce company. What we can do now is automate and really optimize their sorting facilities, for instance. And to your point before, you're going to do that at the building level, then at the site level, and then at the network level. And so it's going to be incremental, but you're going to see your learning systems getting into the operation, getting into the planning. I think that's going to be one of the things that's going to happen. The other thing that's going to happen is AI-assisted X, something. Planning in your particular case at Kinaxis, I think you're going to see AI improving how planners are going to work. Helping them ask the right questions, helping them to do scenario analysis at a speed that is not imaginable right now. And so this is to talk about the resilient issues, things that we cannot do right now that will become possible because of the speed in optimization and the speed in machine learning. So that's how it's going to connect to the things that are already existing.
Yeah. I mean, I align 100%. Certainly on the planning side. So again, it's a planning audience. People are heavily embedded in using AI to improve planning, forecasting in particular. It's totally working. What you're saying, which is a thrill, and I feel the same exact thing, is if you start having the ability to have node by node improvements, node times node, and then full end-to-end, learning against data, so the historical data set of what happened last period, and you add the compute power question, all of a sudden you're getting to a point where the notion of a digital twin actually becomes pretty darn useful.
So I'm really happy that you mentioned digital twins, because this is one of the big things that we are doing in the Institute. Every time we work with a partner, it's all about first building the digital twin so that you can actually replace pieces of it using optimization, using learning. And then you can start doing things that are not possible right now, like this scenario analysis, sensitivity analysis. A lot of companies now are interested in what happens, what would happen if this event occurs. And so currently they have to wait a very long time to get the simulation going. What if you could do that in milliseconds instead of taking 40 minutes? It's a game changer. And I think that's what you're going to see with AI. It's going to be digital twins combined with optimization offline, combined with machine learning online. And that's going to be, in my opinion, a game changer for the planners. They're going to be able to do things, to ask questions, to have sensitivity analysis that they cannot do right now.
So at the risk of raining in our own parade, when I work with the companies I serve on boards for, or clients of Kinaxis or friends in the industry, there's always the phrase, "Oh, but my data." And we know AI outcomes are going to only be as good as the data and the richness of the data, the context of the data. What about the data? What are you seeing in terms of obstacles to good AI implementations? And is it true, is it right to think that the first place we got to go to is getting our data right?
I have a view. Love to hear yours as well. Yes, of course. I mean, you can't use AI. You can't train an ML model without a data set. And it has to be pretty large or it can't do enough, error backflush. So you can't really use it. The thing that I see in the practical side of supply chain operators trying to just use it is if you try to go too big, in other words, if you want to bring a master data strategy from the age of putting in SAP, you may never actually start. So this point about what Pascal said about doing it in a building, that's right. That's actual data you can get, and it's pretty darn clean. That's a small data set, and you're going to apply a small model. The way I like to think about it, and the way I think it's increasingly showing success is, I want to get the data right first, but the question about do I have good, clean data isn't, let's take a look at my data and my fields. It's what problem am I trying to solve and what data would be great to have to solve it. Start there and see if your data is good enough to at least take a crack at it.
Right.
And if it's not all perfect, you may be okay taking a run at it and then tuning the data. And rather than cleaning every single element of the data, find the data that's interfering with performance and fix that. So in other words, it goes back to what I said about incrementalism. And I think, Pascal, you nailed it when you said, this is the way we did it at Amazon. It's building by building, then it's region by region, then you're flowing up into an inventory allocation model. I mean, there's a whole series of models that are all tied together, but each one has to have great data, to Angel's point. So why try to get all the data in the world solved before you start working? I mean, that's just what I'm saying is the practical application. I don't know if your thoughts align again.
Let me build on some of the things that you're saying. Obviously, data is crucial. I mean, there is no doubt about it. If you don't have good data, you can't optimize, you can't do machine learning. Machine learning is even, it's even more important for machine learning. But let me tell you two things that I think are really important. So first, the data that we have now compared to 5 years ago is amazing. So a lot of the companies, a lot of the partners we work with, they have really good data now. So they come to us and they say, we have this massive amount of data. We don't know what to do with it. So it's a completely game changer for us. I mean, we used to say, okay, how do we extract that data for you? How do we clean it up? It's not the case for many companies now. It's changing. It's amazing. Yeah. The second thing is that you don't need all the data to start with. So when we work with partners, we are basically telling us, give us as much as you can, but we're going to augment the data because we are also good in forecasting, for instance. We're going to build models and we're going to generate, what we do is something which is called data augmentation. We take the data and we, under reasonable assumption, we can generate more data, and now we can train the model with that data. So, this is one of the things that is not completely understood by most people, but you can actually start with a data set and augment it. I mean, people do that in computer vision all the time. But you can do that for supply chains, and then you get, a completely different position. So I think that's another thing which is important. And then to your point, you don't have to start with the end-to-end supply chain. You can start with different places. And then, you in a sense create a culture of data inside your company. And they will see the benefits very quickly. Everybody in the company will see the benefits quickly.
Do either of you see any concerns around ethics or bias? I know in the Informs community, the advanced analytics community, there's been a lot of conversations around bias in the data and how that impacts the AI models. Do you think this is a concern when it comes to supply chain? I see Pascal nodding his head.
I'm laughing because we had a review of our institute by the external advisor about like a month ago, and they praised the ethical AI trust that we have. And the reason is that what we do is what the government now is promoting as well, which is called ethics by design. Or responsible AI by design. So you start by saying, this is how we're going to design the system. And the ethical consideration, the responsibilities that we have, as a company, in your case, they are included in the design itself. So you are looking, is it equitable? Are you introducing biases? Are you actually biasing your supply chain to specific types of customers and things like this? And so afterwards, obviously, it's a discussion, right? So how do you balance all these things with efficiency and resilience and so on, sustainability? But you do that in a very conscious way by design. And I think that's the key things that we have to do. And so we have an entire team working on this, making sure that we have also the technical development to support that, because typically you are optimizing different things that we were not used to do before, and they are more difficult to optimize. But there is progress in that area as well at the technical level. So design and then the technology to meet the design goals in a sense.
So we've talked about the data challenge and your suggestions, incredibly pragmatic, right? Be focused, think about the data that matters, think about getting started in segmented places and make progress and so on. What other obstacles are there? We hear a lot about the obstacles of provenance and copyright and content protection, all of these things. But from your perspectives, both of you, what are the obstacles that you see principally applying here that could retard progress?
I can think of some obstacles that are incredibly front of mind and really small scale, which is when I hear people, and I heard it today, say AI, blockchain, IoT, as though they're very slightly different versions of the same thing, that's an obstacle. And I think that leads to people thinking, okay, cool, digitization, what should we do first? I'll take a little IoT and a little AI and maybe a little blockchain. They're so, it's chalk and cheese, as they say. Yeah. You've got to know what you're looking into. And I think understanding. We do a thing, 0100's running this initial pilot with a handful of companies, about a dozen big companies. It's simple. It's an AI census. Literally, that's what we call it. So that loop you described, what have you got? Is it classical, simple AI? Is it a machine learning type of AI? Is it a deep neural net? Is it even a generative AI? And what is it doing for you? Just know what you got. I think one of the barriers is knowing what you got. All the legal stuff you're talking about, I hear about that, but I think that's a step away from the practicalities of what have I actually got? What might I want to invest in and why? And how do I even sort of kick off a team? There are other barriers that are attached to the people. How do you build a team? How do you sort of take skills that aren't totally there and leverage a handful of people who've got great expertise with a bunch of people who know the business questions you're trying to build out? That's not that different for any other tech as far as I can see. But what actually is it? And how do I know I've even got, the same species crawling around my end-to-end supply chains? I think of that as the first hurdle. And these legal considerations, they're more generative than anything else, more generative AI than anything else. So I think of them as a next order barrier. I don't know, Pascal, again, you've probably seen some of these things at a higher level of abstraction.
So I think that there are some issues with data that we encounter because, we want as much data as possible. And in general, some companies, they have data, but they don't own the data. I mean, it's the case of Kinaxis, it's the case of many, many companies because they manage assets, for instance, but they don't own the assets. And so I think getting these data agreements sometimes is a bottleneck. And so we have to we want to find a way around that. But there are ways to do that. There are many ways to do that. And so, but I think you need to actually make people think about those issues in more general terms. So that's one of the things. Sometimes also, I think what we find is that people have been trained in this field in a very different way that what AI is all about. And so AI is more data-driven. People have been in the field of industrial and system engineering, have been building models for a long time and then applying it to the data. And now you're merging these two things because I think the value is not in one or the other. It's in merging the two things. But it's also a kind of managing the change and the perception of people of what is right. And so I think that explaining to people the importance of data and what you can find in the data is actually something which is sometimes a bottleneck. They have to understand there is tremendous value in the data. Look at the data before you build your model. And so this is something that is also, you have to change the education system a little bit for that as well.
Yeah, one of the things I worry about is the risk of overregulation. The hype cycle is creating fear in pockets. Yeah. And regulators can interpret that fear or perhaps over-interpret fear and create regulatory barriers that will prevent progress. So I think one of the things that our audience can think about is, how can they get engaged so that it is clear to regulators that affect their industry what the opportunity is and how it can be controlled. Otherwise, you could see and we've seen cases of this before where the regulations get ahead of the practice, and then it's hard to bring them back to allow for innovation to flourish and allow for things to expand. And this is a case where I think boards are very concerned about, especially in Europe, where the regulatory environment is really, really moving quickly.
The other thing that I think of sometimes with respect to regulation is if you're going to try to regulate something that you can't enforce, Scope 3 is like this. Scope 3 regulation, I need to expose all of my scope. Do you really know even what you're asking for? The answer is actually no. And I feel it's similar with AI regulation. There are principles written into some of the draft stuff in the EU that I think sound principled correctly, intended correctly, but can you enforce it? And if you can't enforce it, then I think you end up with a regulatory framework that's like a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Everybody's speeding the entire time. So what's the point of paying any attention to the laws at all? I think this is how, frankly, prohibition led to so much gangsterism and drunkenness, because we made a rule that didn't really make sense. And so we worked around the rules, and we ended up shooting each other and getting, alcohol poisoning. I worry about regulation shooting itself in the foot.
So I want to pitch in here because there are technologies for actually privacy management in a sense. Right. So you have this technique that we have been working on, which is called differential privacy. It's actually a technology that guarantees, that give you as much guarantees as you can have while staying practical, right? So you are basically you represent your data set, you have a high fidelity of your data set. At the same time, it's very, the probability of identifying someone is very low, and you can control that probability. Now, I think the government, we have to actually tell the government that this is the kind of privacy that we want to have because it's reasonable.
Yes.
It gives you the fidelity that you want on the data, and at the same time, it gives high guarantees to, people, to the citizen of the country. Now, Europe, as you said, went way too far. The definition of privacy was so strong that even differential privacy, which is like recognized as the best framework, right, couldn't be used. And so that's going too far. And so I think you need this balance. You need to inform people of what you can do. I think there are technology and policy issues that you have to merge. Yeah. But we can do a lot of interesting things without using the actual data, right? So a representation of the data which is high fidelity.
Well, I think we can agree that this is a really exciting and interesting place to be right now, that AI is something that everyone wants more of, but they don't completely understand what they're asking for, and the potential in supply chain is really fascinating. I think that's a wrap for us on this one, so I'm going to thank both of you for joining us today. Angel, thank you once again for joining me.
Great.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Big Ideas in Supply Chain. You'll find further resources from both of our guests and on this topic in the podcast description. Thanks so much.